Honor to Sister Mangan. As Brother Marshall would say, this is Sister Vesta Mangan's class. I'm very thankful to be here.
What pressure you all put on me?
No, we love you. All right.
Well, let me just tell you before you get started, and this is terrible for me to do this, but Marie's grandbaby was born, wasn't supposed to be, had to put in the bed, and I just want to thank God because that's a prayer.
So we see in the Bible that Paul equates walking with God to running a race. And that word race is referring to the Greek race, which was a marathon. 26 miles. This was a long race. It's not a quick sprint, but it's something that's quite long. It's quite intense. And after several intense sessions of grueling study, I have discovered this very scientific fact that people do not like to run.
That's so true.
We get up in the morning. We do our run. We're now running 3 miles in the morning, and I do not like to run. I'll be honest. I thought maybe, a couple months into this, maybe it'll become enjoyable. Maybe I'll start seeing the health benefits of it, but I'm still weighing out the donuts and the running. It's not looking good in my mind. In fact, as humans, we are not very good at all at sticking to things that take a long time. It's not in our nature to do that. Every year, thousands of people set resolutions for themselves at New Year's. And because midnight is obviously the greatest time to make life decisions, we set all these goals, and surprisingly, only 8% will go on to meet that goal. 92% will give up on the goal that they set for themselves. And I was reading a lot of this, the large majority of them will give up by January 15th. 2 weeks! 2 weeks! You couldn't make it 2 weeks. But we cannot give up in what God has given us to strive towards.
Yeah.
We cannot give up. It's going to take a while, but we got to keep pressing towards it. I'm going to start with a man in the Bible. His story is 2 verses long. 2 verses. But he walked with God. Genesis 5:18 says, "And Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." God took him. That's all that's recorded. He was the 7th in the lineage of Adam, and he walked with God, and Hebrews said that he walked by faith, and he had such favor in the eyes of God that God just took him. Just took him. He's just in the field one day, and then he was not. Incredible. I want to walk like Enoch. I was, one of the words God gave me while I was down here, I was, fighting with the post-trib and the pre-trib and the when was the rapture going to come, and God just told me, would you walk like Enoch? Enoch didn't even know there was a rapture, but he walked by faith, and God just took him, right? Yeah. And so I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk like Enoch. One day I hope that I'm just walking by faith, and God just comes and he just takes me. I want to be in that place of favor in God's eyes, that one day he just takes me.
Yeah, that's good.
And I'd love to preach about the rapture and get all the amens, because I know that the rapture is an exciting thing, but that's not what I have. Rather, it's interesting to look at the lineage of Enoch. See, in this day, there was no form of communication. There was no written form. So you couldn't write anything down. You couldn't write the story. So everything had to be passed down by spoken word. So the only way you could find out about the Lord was to be taught about the Lord by your family, by the people who raised you. So the story of Adam wasn't written down for somewhere you could just be walking along and just find it, or someone could just open up a book and show you the story of Adam and that God walked with Adam in the cool of the day. But rather, it would have to be taught to you by the people that you know. I find it interesting to see that this would be passed down through generation to generation. especially because David wrote, "But the mercy of the Lord is everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, and his righteousness unto his children's children." And so I began to study the righteousness of Enoch and how it passed down from to his children and his children's children. Well, Enoch had a son named Methuselah. And he lived longer than any man on earth. I'd say he was blessed of God. I'd also say that he honored his father's teaching, because the Bible says that you honor your father and your mother, and your days will be long on the earth. And he lived longer than anyone. He saw his father just be taken by the Lord, and he honored his father and mother. He lived longer than any man. And he had a son named Lamech. And Lamech's son was Noah. And Lamech named Noah because he said, you will comfort us concerning the curse that the Lord has put in the ground. Lamech named his son, he was a promised child. He said, you're going to comfort us with the curse that we are facing. He prophetically named him that, knowing what was going to come. Knowing he named his son after the rainbow that would soon come, but he didn't know that he was naming his son after that. And the Bible says that Lamech lived 595 years after Noah was born. I want you guys to remember that number. He lived 595 years after Noah was born. And the world was wicked. In fact, the thoughts of man were continually wicked. Continually. I'm talking about Noah's day. If you thought I was talking about today, I understand that. But it was continually wicked. It's only a couple generations from Adam. And yet the world has completely turned away from God, who had walked with them in the cool of the day. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's right. The walk of this faithful man named Enoch passed down from generation to generation until we find the walk of Noah. And I'm thankful for the elders in my life whose walk has been passed down and has allowed me to walk, allowed me to find grace. And I'm walking by the walk of the people that came before me. And so Noah, it says, is 500 years old, and he is told by the Lord to build an ark to save his families from the waters. And the Bible says that he entered into the ark at 600. 600. He worked for 100 years on this ark, and when he was 600, he entered, and he was working for 100 years on this promise that his family was going to be saved from the destruction that came on the earth. But do you remember how long his father lived? 595. He worked for 95 years on the promise that his family would be saved, and 5 years before he was finished, his father died. Talk about discouraging. But God, I don't understand. I'm working to save my family from this flood. I've been working 95 years. How can the one who taught me to walk, how can the one who showed me the way, how can he die now? I don't understand this. But I'm thankful Noah didn't let the obstacle at the 95% mark stop him from building the ark. He didn't stop building. And today I want to talk on this point, having faith in the 5%. Having faith in the 5%.
Amen.
This was the starting point, and as I started to read, and the Lord started to confirm this with other stories, I see the woman with the issue of blood. We don't know how far she came to find Jesus. It's possible that she came from very far. We know that she was unclean. She would have had to live outside the cities. And we know that it took a long time to travel back then. In fact, in Jonah, it says that the city of Nineveh was so large that it took 3 days travel just to get through the one city. It took a long time to travel in those days. So we don't know how far this woman came to find Jesus, but she left on this promise that there's this man out there who can heal me from something I've been looking for 12 years. I've been looking for 12 years, and I heard about this man named Jesus, and so I'm going to travel to go find him. And you know, she'd spent all her money on doctors and physicians. She spent everything she had, so she didn't have hired servants to carry her stuff for her. She didn't have a big entourage to travel with, but she says, I'm just going to walk by myself. I'm just going to go, and I'm going to travel this distance. I'm going to find him. And when she gets to him, he's surrounded by a multitude. In fact, this multitude is so so strong. The chapter before, Luke 8, just a funny story is that Jesus was teaching and the multitude was around him, and then it says, Luke 8:19, then came to him his mother and his brethren, and they could not come at him for the press. And it was told him by certain which said, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to see thee. Jesus' own mother and brethren couldn't get through this multitude. They had the VIP status. They could have used the mom card to say, that's my boy! But they couldn't get through it because people were so fighting, they were so desiring to see Jesus that even his own mother and brethren couldn't get through this press. That's how hard it was. That's how strong this multitude was around him. I find it interesting that they tell Jesus that your mother and your brethren are standing outside, and he says, who are my mother and who are my brethren? They that hear and believe. And I think he was kind of jabbing at his brethren who didn't believe until after his death. He was saying, you know what, I don't have time for people who don't believe in me. He says, but let the people who are fighting to get to me, I'm going to teach with them. I'm not going to leave you guys for the people who think they have the VIP card, but I'm going to stay here with the people who are fighting to get to me. The people who want me are the people that I'm going to be with.
Come on now, come on.
There was no VIP passes allowed. It was very difficult to get to Jesus. And here comes this woman who is sick, who is weak in her body, who has been fighting. She's been losing blood, something that weakens you, something that drains your strength for 12 years, and she's traveled a long way, and she thinks, okay, if I can just make this travel, I'll get to Jesus. And she's walking, and she's walking, and she gets there, and there's this multitude that's standing in her way. And she may have said, I don't get it. Lord, I was following the promise that you placed in my heart that this man could heal me, and I've come here, but now there's this obstacle in my way that may only be maybe 500, 1,000 feet, but I can't get through this one obstacle that's just at the very end of my journey. I can't get through this obstacle. God gave me hope that I'd be healed, and I got up and I dragged my sick, tired body through this desert heat. Miles and miles to get to it, and I get here and there's a multitude standing in the way.
Yeah.
You've helped me come 95% of the way, and now this crowd isn't going to let me walk the last 5%.
That's good.
Right, come on.
But she didn't stop. She pushed. She may not have been able to walk that last 5%, but she crawled that last 5%. And she says, I'm going to push through this last 5% because if I can even just get just a touch of it, I know that I'll be healed. And when she gets through, she touches that hem, and Jesus turns around and says, who touched me? And the disciples say, who touched you? Look at all the thousands of people around you that are all trying to grab you, and you say, who touched me? And he says, no. All these people are around me, but only one person touched me. It's the person who pushed through the 5%. It's the person who had a reason to give up. It's the person who wasn't just a groupie of Jesus, but said, I'm going to push through everything else, and crawled and got stepped on, but said, I'm going to make it. The last 5%, I've come too far to turn back.
That's a good word. Good, Ivan. Right, come on now. Come on now.
And the children of Israel. What an incredible story. They were delivered out of Egypt. God went, he sent plagues. He opened up Pharaoh's heart to let them go. He leads them to the Red Sea. He parts the Red Sea. He allows them to cross. And for years they follow the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. They're walking with God on this promise that there's this land that's waiting for them. And so they're walking for this promise. And they get to the border of their promise, and they send in spies to go look at the promised land that they've been walking so long to get to. And they're just walking, and they're walking, and they get there, and they send in the spies, and the spies come back and say, look, we've come all this way, and I know we're at the border, but we've looked, and at the border there is giants, and we cannot fight them.
Hallelujah.
They made it all the way to the border.
That's good.
And unlike Noah, unlike the woman with the issue of blood, they allowed themselves to be discouraged by the report of the 10.
That's right.
And they got 95% of the way, and they saw the obstacle that lived at the 95%, and they turned around and they left because of the giants. And these giants would later be slain by children. They would later be slain by children, but they turned back because they started believing in the eyes of the spies instead of looking up at the pillar that had led them there.
Yeah, that's good.
And they started looking at the obstacle, and they stopped looking at the promise.
Preach, come on now.
I've come here with this message. You've been praying. You've been seeking. You've been interceding. You've been working. And there may be an obstacle arise. I wish I could tell you how much longer the journey will be. But I'm not God. I don't know where you are in your journey. But I know that when an obstacle arises, it may very well be the obstacle that is at the 95%. You may be 5% from the promise. You may be 5% from the miracle. You may be 5% from your family being saved from this world. Because I know this. Discouragement lives on the border of promise.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Good.
Noah got to 95% and suddenly he lost someone in his life. And he could have said, God, I feel alone. But instead he picked up the hammer and he said, I'm going to keep building.
Yes.
The woman could have said, these other people are blocking me. I can't get through them. But instead, she said, I'm going to push my way through. The children of Israel spent another 40 years in the wilderness because they said that the enemy is too much for us. But the Bible says that he that endureth to the end, to them that have faith in the 5%. The greatest thing, people ask me all the time, you learning anything down here? And maybe just a little bit. But they are feeding me. Amen.
That's good stuff. That's good, Louisiana.
I'll show you the greatest thing that I've learned down here. This is a prayer cloth that I have. It started out white. It started out all together. And I wrote on it, you can barely even tell anyone, but I put the initials of this family that Lord burdened me for. And I would pray for these initials. And I pray for each one of that family. And you'll see that there's this gold paint on my prayer cloth. And you think, how on earth did gold paint get on your prayer cloth? And I was praying on a prayer shift in the tabernacle. And I went and I anointed this and I laid it in the altar of incense. And what I didn't realize is that the oil took the paint off the altar. And my first thought was, worst intern ever. You've disgraced, you've vandalized the altar of God. But what is going on? I was all done. But then I started to think about it. And the Lord started to work with me. And you know what? Weeks later, like 6 weeks later, I came back. And I was praying at that altar of incense, and I looked in, and I noticed that there was a part that was kind of shiny in it. And I reached down, and I kind of just touched it with my hands, and my hands came away. I had gold paint on my fingers. And I thought, what? And then it hit me. The oil from my prayers before was still on the altar. I didn't understand it, but the oil was still there. And it didn't really make sense to me, and I thought, Lord, this has been out in the open. This hasn't been covered. This has been out in the open. Why is that oil still there? And he said the oil doesn't evaporate. The air cannot take away the oil of the intercession.
Yeah, that's good.
Let me even take that a step further. The prince of the power of the air cannot take away the oil off the altar. You know, the devil, he sends the birds. He tries to snatch the seed of the gospel, because if he can stop you from hearing the word and from putting the word in your heart, well, then he's won. But he cannot touch the prayers that you've prayed. And the prayers that you've prayed before are still on the altar. They don't go away. They're always there. They're always there. So what are you praying for? What have you been promised? What are you searching for? Don't give up. Don't give up. You may very well be 95% of the way to what you've been promised. You may be 95% of the way to your family being delivered. And you've been crying out, that oil is still on the altar for your family. You may have gotten discouraged. You may have not prayed for a little bit about it. You thought maybe it's not going to happen. That prayer is still on the altar. altar.
Yes, God.
You may very well be at the border of what God has promised you, just like the children of Israel. Don't look at the giant, but look at the promise.
Yeah.
If you believe that right now, would you take that prayer request that you put in your hand? Would you put that up there? I've been praying. I've been praying. I've been praying for it. I've come 95% of the way, and I'm not going to be discouraged. I'm not going to be discouraged. I'm going to press on to what you promised me. Oh, there's been too many prayers. There's been too many tears. I'm not going to turn back. I'm not going to turn back.
Jesus.